Hello, I'm Atu Jamir and you're watching News Pulse on Hornbill TV. Speaking on Election Laws Amendment Bill 2021, Union Law and Justice Minister Kiren Rijiju said that Aadhaar card linking to electoral rolls would not be mandatory but voluntary. For the election process to be clean, electoral rolls need to be clean. This step will save fake voters. Aadhaar card linking to electoral rolls would not be mandatory but voluntary. It's good for an eligible common man. The bill has been discussed in detail with the Election Commission and Law Ministry, keeping the pros and cons and parliamentary Standing Committee's recommendation in mind. As we all know, the Election Law Amendment Bill 2011 was proposed by the Law Minister Kiren Rijiju in the lower house Lok Sabha yesterday, and it was passed today in the upper house Rajya Sabha today. So to get to know more about this Election Law Amendment Bill 2021, we will be joined by our colleague El from the newsroom today. So thank you so much, El, for joining us today as well.
Hello, Atu.
Okay, so coming to the discussion here, could you please tell us more about the Election Law Amendment Bill 2021?
Yeah, thank you. As the name suggests, the new law that we have is an amendment of a previous standing legislation. It's an amendment, it's a modification of the Representation of the People's Act 1950 and Representation of the People's Act 1951. There are no really big changes here in terms of its content, because some of the particulars that have been included in the new law are few, actually, about 3 or 4 of them if you really read through the lines. The biggest change here is how the government wants to require voters, especially those who are seeking new voters identities there within the electoral roll. They are required to come up with their Aadhaar card numbers. So this is the biggest item in the changes. Now what the government is saying is that this is an exercise that will delete all multiple entries, for instance, and this will help in cleaning the country's huge voters base, which is about 9-10 million, yes.
Okay, also as I mentioned earlier, the Law Minister did mention that this wouldn't be mandatory but made voluntary. So what are your views on that as well?
Yeah, definitely. I've gone through the copies, and it's very interesting because the opposition, they have been really vocal about this particular item where the voter is required to provide his Aadhaar details. Now, the provision says that electoral officers are required to ask or request the voter, the one who is registering, to provide his Aadhaar details. And this is to establish his identity. So this is very, very important, because in this context we're talking about people who are underage voting. There might be people who might not be legally in the country, who might register themselves as voters and enjoy benefits. And besides the benefits, they will also be voting like normal citizens of the country. So right now, the provision is that the electoral roll officer, if he is not satisfied with the details of the voter, then he is going to ask for the Aadhaar details of the person. But then again, as you have mentioned earlier, Atu, it is voluntary. For instance, if the administration finds that the application's details are to their satisfaction, you do not require to provide your Aadhaar details. This is voluntary.
Also, like you have mentioned earlier, the opposition was quite vocal about going against this bill. So
Yeah.
the opposition has also mentioned that this will infringe the fundamental rights of the people. So how does it infringe the fundamental rights of the people? Could you please give us some idea on that as well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the public would like to know. Yeah, the opposition have been very vocal about this, and they've been protesting about this new bill legislation. What they're saying is that there are 2 points to it. First, if you are going to ask for Aadhaar details, then you are infringing on the privacy rights of the individual. That is their first contention. And second contention is that for example, the Aadhaar details being incorporated in the electoral identity of the person who has been registered as a voter will be used by the government to influence important government processes like schemes, for example, welfare schemes based on their demographic. Or the government might use these details to actually manipulate elections. So these two are primarily the main issues that the opposition has been raising and for which they have been seeking changes to the legislation that we have now.
Also, as mentioned by the law minister, he also mentioned that it's going to, and also like you mentioned, it's going to clear out electoral database, because we see a lot of cases where a person is registered from so many places, and when it comes to elections. So do you think this Aadhaar card linking, would it be successful? Would it bring any changes to the electoral process?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, in regard to whether the program will be successful, I think it's up to the implementation agencies. They will be taking care of the whole technical processes. But in regard to what the union minister said about deleting multiple entries, India has about 910 million voters, 910.5 million specifically voters. And this is a huge number of voting base, one of the biggest in the world. And when we are talking about a voting base like India, you have multiple entries in millions. So basically what the government is trying to do here, according to the law, according to the legislation that we have seen now, is that through linking the voter's identity to his Aadhaar details to establish his voter's identity, the government will be able to establish that this is a single person. And if in case this person has another electoral roll placed somewhere else, then the the electoral system will detect it and it will be automatically deleted. That's what the government is saying. So the government's contention right now is that the changes that have been made to the legislation we have seen is that it will primarily be to delete all excess or multiple entries in the electoral roll.
All right. Also, since the bill at the end of the day, it's for the benefit of the citizens also, and also it's only for the people. So could you please tell us more about, or give us a hint about, how would it be beneficial, linking the Aadhaar card to the voter's ID? How would it be beneficial for us, the citizens?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Right now, the bill has been, the legislation has been introduced and it has been passed. The implementation will come later, and right now we do not have any information what the government is planning to augment its system so that it works perfectly with the goals of the legislation we have now. However, one thing is clear: the government has been consistently mentioning how, deleting excess entries in the electoral roll will streamline the voting system, the voting base. So here the benefit is that if you're registered in one place, I think it's convenient for you. You don't have to run around to various administrative agencies or the government to actually correct or rectify or delete your name, for instance. If you have one in the village and one in the town, it's a question of convenience here. So I think just mentioning particularly the changes in regard to the Aadhaar details of the person that have been introduced in the legislation itself, I think it's the benefit here right now, for now, is about convenience.
All right. Thank you so much, El, for joining us today. That was quite informative.
Thank you
so
Atu.
much once again.
Thank you, Atu.